Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. This one's a little bit on the long side. But the next comment or question comes from Madness 8556. And it's in response to Korg M1, Korg T series, Korg O1W, My Story, a video I did on in April 2022 about a channel subscriber's experience of those three synthesizers. I was going to say computers then. And what Madness wrote was, I had a Korg T3EX. Now the EX was the expanded version. For over 25 years, absolutely loved it. Milked it for all it was worth, producing my entire musical pieces and backing tracks with this 8-track sequencer. When the O1W was released, I seriously thought about trading the T3 for the new model because it had double the polyphony at 32 notes and double the sequencer tracks and multiple timbal parts, as well as improving the FX processors with basic real-time parameter control. However, upon going to my local music store and doing an extensive comparison between the T and the O, I decided to hold on to my T3 because IMHO, it just sounded better than the one for the O series, and a lot of the classic M and T samples were omitted in favour of new O series samples, which in my opinion weren't always better. The X and the N series were more budget instruments with inferior build quality, smaller displays and an inferior keyboard. The N series as well as the X5 didn't, however, have extended waveform ROM with a lot more of the older M, T and O series samplers, as well as double the polyphony up to 64 notes at this point. The next huge step in quality for Korg came in 1995 when they released the Trinity series, which had vastly improved waveform ROM and fabulous sounding multi-timbral effects in sequencer mode with the revolutionary at the time touchscreen interface. Now, I've been after a Triton for a number of years and I have yet to see a good example that I'm going to buy. Or if somebody wants to donate one, happily take that as well. Anyway, I always love, and this is the reason why I quite often put these into the mailbag, because it's always really interesting to find out how other musicians use this legacy tech, or use this legacy tech back in the day. So, you know, thank you for the story. As I say, I love hearing about this sort of stuff. In my view, the inability to transfer sounds, though, between the Korg M1's between platforms is kind of why I think the Korg M1 stayed in production for so long. You know, you've got to remember that Korg M1's production actually outlasted the T series, which was the synthesizer that was aimed to replace it, and almost outlived the O1W series as well. There wasn't a lot in it in terms of when the M series ceased production and the O1W series ceased production. You know, you may hear me say on many occasions the problem with the Korg Nautilus is the Korg Kronos. And a lot of people have really sort of turned around and said, oh, no, but you know, there's nothing wrong with the Nautilus. No, there's not anything wrong with the Nautilus. And I get berated from a number of individuals when I make that statement. But I stand by that statement because it has nothing to do with functionality of the Korg Nautilus, which, as I've said, is an extremely capable workstation and synthesizer. But it is not sufficiently different from the Korg Kronos, which was its predecessor, to get Korg Kronos users to shell out a chunk of cash. And let's be really fair. You know, the Korg Nautilus has come down in price quite a lot. But when the Korg Nautilus was originally launched, you were looking at about £4,000 in the UK for a Korg Nautilus. And given you probably have spent the better part of £3,500 on your Kronos, that was a huge chunk of cash. Now you can pick a Korg Nautilus up for the sort of low 2000s. But, or the equivalent Nautilus. But what I'm trying to say is there wasn't sufficient difference between the two synthesizers and workstations for a Korg Nautilus user to migrate to a Korg Kronos. Take this anthology backwards, back to the days of the Korg M1, the T-Series and the Korg O1W. Why did the Korg M1 keep selling despite the T-Series having far more, well, I say far more, having more capability? There wasn't enough difference, and there isn't enough difference. I mean, the T-Series takes all the M cards and all the M, sample packs. You can load it on the T-Series. It's quite happy with that, but it has a little bit more capability than the M series did. But there's not enough difference. You know, it's just more or less the same sound engine between the two. So why would you buy T-Series if you were perfectly happy with your 61? No, it's not even 61 note, is it? What's that? It's the lower one. Yeah, it's 61. You were 61 note M1. There's not a lot. I mean, the reason I bought my Korg T1 was two reasons really. Number one, it was an absolute bargain, and number two, I always wanted a Korg T1, and I've restored my Korg T1 to root health, and it is a beautiful instrument to play. Hence the reason why I love it so much. I mean, you know, these certain instruments really stand up, and the T1, the M1 are two of those instruments that really stand up. Can't really comment on the O1W because I've never had one. Anyway, what I'm saying is there wasn't enough difference between the M1, the T1, and then the O1W. Again, sales really suffered. But what they did with the O1W was they kind of introduced the 61 note, then they introduced the 76 note, and then they introduced the flagship, which was the 88 note. But they kind of did it in the wrong sequence. It should have all come to market at the same time. But anyway, that's kind of my view on that sequence of synthesizers. Anyway, Mandus wrote back and said, absolutely nicely stated. The Korg T-Series were also a commercial failure for Korg because they were overpriced for what it was, and you actually say they're souped up M1 on steroids with extra sounds and waveforms and floppy disk drive, larger display, MIDI, expanded MIDI master keyboard capabilities that weren't much used for most users. I mean, I can honestly say, I mean, I saw many acts back in the day that actually had a Korg T1, and I suspect the reason I had it was had a good set of sounds on it. But on the flip side of it, it could drive other MIDI modules. And of course, at this time, the whole thing was about MIDI modules. We're kind of coming back into that. You know, the whole sort of VST market is really a MIDI module in a computer. But it was all about driving. You bought master keyboard and then you drove the sound modules. He writes about my original intention was to get an M1 and get a Korg DF1 filer. I'll pair it up with an external hardware sequencer like the Roland MC50, Yamaha QX5FD or the Cowie Q80 when funds allowed. Luckily for me, the music store I dealt with a lot of the time was having a big sale, and I was able to get an even bigger discount on the Korg T3EX because a good friend knew the store owner. I got such a great discount on the T3, I just went for it. The T3 was a better keyboard, but not enough to tempt the M1 users onto it. There needed to be a real leap in capability. That was my view on the T3, my view on the whole T-Series. And then Madness writes back, exactly my point. The reason why I ended up with a T3 as opposed to an M1 was I got it at a great price at the time. The O1W series was more or less improved. The weakness of the M and T series with double the polyphony, sequencing tracks and resolution, multi-timbral parts, as well as improved effects with basic real-time control on the newer wave station. I must say, however, that the T series had IMHO some better acoustic samples in ROM, and I couldn't justify trading my T3 for an 01W at the time after doing extensive comparison between the two. Now, you differ from a lot of users, because a lot of users were just going into the music store going, oh, I'll have one of them, even though it was expensive. But, you know, for me, and I say this now because money has became very tight for me, is I have to justify every keyboard I buy. I have to justify to myself why I need that keyboard. And I can't just feed my keyboard fetish. So I'm really, I really enjoyed that sort of exchange. And his last sentence really said it all. You know, couldn't justify the cost of the upgrade. And many of us need to kind of think about that sometimes. You know, does the value of the synthesizer justify the purchase? And I think, you know, I'm going to say something controversial now. I think with what's happening with the Behringer stuff is does the cost justify the purchase? Well, if you're buying an old Oberheim machine at number of thousands of pounds, and you can pick up the Behringer clone of the Oberheim machine for just £1,000, is that a good? Does the cost justify the purchase?